My name is Tori Myers, and I was 8,000 miles from home when my own family signed my daughter away. I had been a combat medic for 12 years. I knew how to read a form, sign the right line, keep a copy. The one thing I never planned for was someone forging my name to take my 6-year-old. My stepsister did it while I was deployed. She told people a sentence I will never forget. Soldiers don't get to be moms. They thought distance made me powerless. What they forgot is the one thing the Army stamps on every soldier, and what arrived 4 hours after that caseworker first called. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where we sit with the quiet ones, the people who answer cruelty with paperwork, patience, and the truth told slow. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. Let me back up to who I was before any of this. I joined the Army at 18 because nobody was coming to save me, so I learned to save other people instead. 12 years later, I was a combat medic, a staff sergeant, the woman who stayed calm when everyone else was shaking. I had a daughter named Lily. She was 6, gap-toothed, obsessed with frogs and the color green. Her father left before she could walk, and I stopped waiting for him a long time ago. It was just us. I rented a small place near the base outside Fayetteville, North Carolina. I kept our life in order the way I kept a med kit in order. Everything labeled, nothing missing. When the deployment came down, 9 months overseas, I did what I always do. I made a plan for it. I made a plan for everything. I even had a plan for who would raise Lily if I never came home at all. I reached up and touched my dog tags, the way I always did when the thought got too big. 2 thin pieces of stamped metal at my collarbone. They reminded me who I was when I forgot. I had a plan for the worst day of my life. What I did not have was a plan for someone forging my name while I served. That was the one form I never thought I'd have to read. I'd read 1,000 forms in my career. I never imagined one of them would have my own signature on it, written by a hand that wasn't mine. The paperwork was already in motion before I knew it existed. To explain the family, I have to go back to when I was 12. My mother died when I was young, and a few years later, my father remarried a man named Raymond Pruitt. Ray came with a daughter named Sabrina, 3 years older than me, and a house where I was always the guest who overstayed. Ray was old school, rigid, a man who believed a roof and a rule were the same kind of love. Sabrina decided early that I was competition for a seat at a table that was never that big. She watched everything I got like it was something taken from her. When I enlisted, she rolled her eyes. When I earned the GI Bill, she called it a handout. When I got base housing and a steady check, she said I was getting paid to leave my own kid. At a family cookout years back, when I told everyone I'd deploy, Sabrina set down her plate and looked at me across the yard. "Soldiers don't get to be moms," she said, loud enough for the relatives to hear. The grill kept hissing. Nobody told her she was wrong. I told myself it was just Sabrina being Sabrina, a sharp tongue on a bad day. I filed it under noise and moved on. I should have understood it differently. To her, that line wasn't an insult. It was a plan she hadn't built yet. I was a medic. I triaged threats by how loud they bled. Sabrina never bled loud. She just kept that sentence in her pocket and waited for the day I'd be too far away to answer it. 4 weeks before I shipped out, I did everything the right way. The Army requires single parents to file a family care plan, a real document that names who cares for your child while you serve. I did not name Sabrina. I named Marie Dolan, my best friend since basic, a pediatric nurse with a clean record and a fenced backyard. Marie had been background checked, fingerprinted, the works. I signed the plan in front of a JAG officer, in ink, with my middle initial, the way I sign everything. Tori R. Myers. I put my daughter with someone I trusted. On paper. The right way. I gave Marie copies of Lily's shot records, her school forms, her doctor's number written on the inside cover. I even left a notarized letter granting Marie temporary authority because I do not leave gaps. Then Sabrina texted me, 3 days before my flight. "We should talk about Lily before you go," she wrote. I told her Lily was settled and thanked her, and meant none of the warmth. I knew better than to hand Sabrina a key to anything. She didn't need a key, though. She needed a pen and a man willing to stamp a lie. I boarded the plane believing I had sealed every door. I had built a wall around my daughter out of forms and signatures, the only kind of wall I trusted. I just never imagined someone would climb it by faking the one signature that wall was built on. Mine. The first 6 weeks overseas ran on a rhythm. Every few days, when the network held, my phone would ring on a video call and there would be Lily's face filling the screen. Too close, all nose and grin. That ringtone became the best sound in my world. I'd be covered in dust at a forward operating base, and one chime would pull me home for 10 minutes. We'd talk about frogs. She'd show me a tooth she lost. Then week 6, the rhythm broke. I called at our usual time and Marie answered instead of Lily, and Marie's voice was wrong. Tight. Careful. Sabrina came by, she said, with some men, with papers. I asked what papers. Marie said she didn't get a good look, that they'd talked fast and official, that Sabrina had said something about a court and custody, and that Marie should not interfere. Then the call dropped. Bad signal or bad timing, I couldn't tell. I sat in the dark with the phone still warm in my hand and tried to call back. Nothing. I told myself there was an explanation. There usually is. But I'd spent 12 years learning to read the difference between a small problem and a bleeding one by the look on a face, and Marie's face had been bleeding. Papers and men and a word like custody do not show up by accident. Somebody had moved while my back was turned, and the only thing I knew for certain was that I was on the wrong side of an ocean to stop it. It took me a day to get a line through to Sabrina. When she finally answered, her voice was calm in a way that made my skin go cold. "Lily's with me now," she said. "It's official. You weren't here." I asked her what she meant by official. I asked her slow, the way you ask a patient a question when you already suspect the answer. "There are papers," she said. "Signed and filed. Custodies being handled properly, by people who actually show up." I asked which papers. Who signed what? She said the words that started everything. "You signed them, Tori. You agreed to this before you left." I stood very still. I had agreed to nothing. I had signed Marie's name into my daughter's life, not Sabrina's. And I had the documents to prove it. "I signed nothing," I told her. There was a pause on the line, just long enough. "So who did?" I said. It wasn't really a question to her. It was a question I was going to spend the next 9 weeks answering with everything I had. Sabrina didn't flinch. "People do what's best for children," she said, and hung up. I lowered the phone and looked at the wall of my bunk, at a child's drawing taped above my pillow, and I felt the floor of my whole plan give way. Someone had put my name on a page I never touched, and the law, for the moment, believed them over me. I did what any mother does first. I tried to fix it with my hands, and learned my hands couldn't reach. I called Marie back. Lily was already gone, she said, taken the day before by Sabrina with a caseworker and a paper that looked real. I called the County Child Services line and got a recording and an after-hours queue. I pulled up flights home and remembered, in the middle of the search, that I could not get on one. I was mid-deployment, 8,000 miles out, bound by orders I could not break to chase a problem I could not abandon. That was the moment the trap really closed, not the forgery itself. The distance that made the forgery hold. I had done everything by the book, and the book had a chapter nobody warned me about. The one where being a good soldier is the very thing used against you. Above my pillow was Lily's drawing, a green stick figure she'd labeled Mommy in her brave clothes, mailed to me in week 3. I reached up and touched my dog tags and made myself breathe. Panic is a luxury for people who aren't responsible for someone. I was responsible for someone. So I stopped clawing at the locked door and started looking for the one I could open. 8,000 miles, a forged signature, and a clock I couldn't see were all stacked against me. But I had spent my whole life turning impossible odds into a treatment plan. There had to be a procedure for this. The Army has a procedure for almost everything. I just had to go find the one with my daughter's name on it. The next morning, I walked into the JAG office on the FOB and laid it out flat, the way you brief a doctor on a trauma. A captain named Hollis listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she leaned forward and told me two things that flipped a switch in my chest. First, I was active duty, deployed, which meant I had the Service Members Civil Relief Act behind me. Under the SCRA, she said, I could request a stay, a legal pause, on civil and administrative proceedings that my service kept me from attending. They could not finalize anything about my daughter behind my back just because I couldn't be in the room. Second, she looked at the scanned page I'd described and said the part I needed most. A forged signature on a legal instrument is not a family squabble, Sergeant. In North Carolina, that can be charged as a crime. For the first time since Marie's voice broke on that call, I saw a road instead of a wall. Hollis said a caseworker would be assigned to verify the placement, and that if she was any good, she'd see what we were both already seeing. Before we go further, let me say something to anyone watching this, because something was taken from you while your back was turned too. There is a name for the thing that protects you when you can't be in the room, and it's coming in this story. Stay with me and subscribe, so the next part finds you. I walked out of that office no longer a victim of a paper. I was a medic with a patient to stabilize, and the patient was my own life. The bleeding had a source now. I just had to reach it. Hollis taught me the machinery, and the machinery was slower than my fear. She showed me how to send an American Red Cross emergency message to flag the situation up my chain, and how to apply for emergency leave. But leave has to be approved, she warned. It moves at the speed of signatures, not panic. You may not be home for weeks. I sat with that. Weeks. My daughter was sleeping in Sabrina's house tonight, and the fastest honest path to her was measured in weeks. A younger version of me would have raged at that. The medic in me did the only useful thing instead. I started a log, a plain notebook, then a file on my laptop, where I wrote down every date, every name, every call, every claim. The day Marie said the men came, the day Lily was taken, the exact words Sabrina used on the phone. I couldn't fly home, so I did the next soldier thing. I built a record. Records don't get tired. Records don't lose their temper. Records sit quietly and wait to be checked against the truth. And they always win that fight if you keep them honest. Hollis nodded when she saw the first page. That, she said, is how you win this. Not by being louder than them, by being more accurate than them. I underlined one line in my log and circled it twice, the signature on their paper. If I never signed it, then a real person with a real hand on a real date had. And every one of those real things leaves a trail. It happened the way the title of my own life would later read. Hollis filed a request for verification through the proper channels, and 4 hours later, the caseworker called. Her name was Denise Wallace, and the first thing I noticed was that she promised me nothing. No reassurance, no warmth, just careful questions in a steady voice. She asked Lily's date of birth. She asked who I'd named in my family care plan. She asked the exact day I deployed. I answered everyone without hesitating, because I had the records open in front of me. Then Denise went quiet for a second, and I heard paper move on her end. Sergeant Myers, she said, I'm holding a voluntary placement agreement with your signature on it. The room around me went very small. Then it's forged, I said. Send it to me. She didn't argue and she didn't agree. She said she would review the file and that she'd email me a copy, and that I should not contact Sabrina directly again, that anything I had should come to her. That was the moment I understood Denise was not my enemy and not my friend. She was something better. She was a professional who cared whether the paper was true. I'd spent my career around people like that, the ones who don't take a pulse on faith. I thanked her and hung up, and stared at the dog tags on my chest in the laptop's reflection. Somewhere in a county office, a page existed with my name on a line I never signed. In a few hours, I'd see it with my own eyes. I wasn't sure I was ready to look at myself lying. While I waited for the file, I started to understand why. Marie kept me wired into the family group chat, and between the lines I could see Sabrina's reasons take shape. Her divorce 2 years back had left her underwater, behind on rent, working shifts that never covered the month. Taking Lily as a kinship placement came with a monthly subsidy from the state, a check for caring for a relative's child. But it wasn't only the money. Sabrina had talked herself into a story where she was the hero. Someone has to be her real mother, she wrote to a cousin, where everyone could see. I'm the one who's actually here. To her, my deployment wasn't service. It was abandonment with a uniform on. She had decided, somewhere in the gap between her resentment and her bank balance, that a woman who left her child to go overseas had already forfeited that child, and that she, Sabrina, was simply finishing what I'd started. It made me want to put my fist through the screen. That's the thing people miss about villains. The dangerous ones don't think they're villains. They think they're correcting an injustice, and that conviction makes them tidy and patient and willing to forge a name. But one detail in the chat caught my eye and held it. Sabrina hadn't pulled this off alone. A page like that doesn't notarize itself. Somewhere there was a second person, a stamp, a seal, a signature that wasn't forged at all, that belonged to a real licensed human who had watched my fake one go down on paper. Find that person, I thought, and the whole thing unravels. Then Ray called, and Ray was the pressure I'd grown up under. Denise had mentioned, neutrally, that the original intake worker had been told by family that I was absent, unstable, never around. I knew whose voice that was before he ever dialed me. When Ray called, he didn't shout. He never had to. We did what was best for that child, he said, like a man reading a verdict. You were gone. Somebody had to step up. I asked him if he knew the papers were forged. He paused, and in that pause I heard a lifetime of him deciding that the rules were whatever kept his household looking right. I did what a father does, he said. That was all he'd give me. I kept my voice flat, the way I keep it when a patient is coding and everyone else is yelling. What's best for her is her mother, I told him. And I'll prove it on paper, the same kind of paper you forged. He told me I'd always been ungrateful. Then he hung up too. I sat there and let the anger pass through me like a wave I refused to ride. Ray believed himself. That was the worst part. He wasn't cackling over a scheme. He was a rigid old man who'd convinced himself that taking a soldier's daughter was a rescue. We did what was best for that child. I wrote his exact words in my log, dated them, and underlined them. Someday, in a room with a judge in it, I was going to read that sentence back to him and let everyone decide what best really meant. I didn't know yet that the day was closer than I thought. Denise's email came through at 2 in the morning my time. The chime of it woke me, and for a second I thought it was Lily calling. That good sound. And then I remembered nothing good was arriving at this hour. I sat up on my bunk under the green stick figure my daughter had drawn me, and I opened the attachment on my laptop. There it was. A scanned voluntary placement agreement, county letterhead, official boxes filled in official ink. Lily's name. Sabrina's name, as the proposed caregiver. The legal language about a parent consenting to placement. My hand found my dog tags without my telling it to. I scrolled down the page slowly, reading every line, the medic in me cataloging each detail before I let myself feel anything. Date of the alleged agreement, witness lines, and then the signature line at the bottom, the one that was supposed to be the whole foundation of their case. I scrolled to it, and there I was. Except I wasn't. My name sat on that line in a looping hand, confident and wrong, a forgery by someone who had seen my signature once and copied the shape without knowing the soul of it. I leaned closer to the screen until the pixels blurred. Something about it was off in a way I could feel before I could name. I made myself stop, breathe, and look again. This time not as a grieving mother, but as the woman who had signed 10,000 forms and knew her own hand better than her own face. Whoever wrote this had made a mistake. 2 of them. And those 2 mistakes were about to become the floor I'd stand on for the rest of this fight. Here is the thing I held onto for the rest of this story. The small concrete thing, so hold it with me. I have signed my name the same way for 12 years. Tori R. Myers. The R is for Ray, my mother's name. I never drop it. Not on a check, not on a deployment form, not on a birthday card. It is muscle memory bought with grief. The signature on that forged page read, Tori Myers. No R, no mother in it. Whoever copied my name had never once watched me sign, because if they had, they'd have known the R was the part I'd never leave out. That was the first mistake. The second was worse for them. Up in the corner, beside the witness line, sat a notary stamp with a date, March 9th. I read it twice. On March 9th, I was at the FOB, 8,000 miles away, with my name on the duty roster for a shift that started at dawn, logged in an incident report from a drill that same afternoon. I could not have stood in a North Carolina office in front of a notary on March 9th. It was physically impossible, and unlike the signature, that impossibility was documented by the United States Army in 3 separate places. I didn't cry, I didn't rage. I got up, found a pen, and started building a chart. The forged signature, screenshotted. My military ID beside it, the duty roster for March 9th. And, in the center of it all, my deployment orders, the document that proved with a stamp where I was and why. I signed nothing, I'd told Sabrina. So who did? Now I had a date. And a date can be checked against the whole record of a deployed soldier's life. They had built their case on a single page. I was about to bury it under hundreds. I emailed Denise everything before sunrise, the chart, the duty roster, the orders, the missing initial circled in red. By the next afternoon, she'd answered with a name. The notary on the agreement was a man called Curtis Vance. I'd never heard of him. Marie had. He was a guy who hung around the edges of Sabrina's life, the kind who'd notarize anything for $40 and a favor. Hollis explained what that meant in legal terms, and it was better than I'd hoped. In North Carolina, a careful notary keeps a journal of the acts they perform, who appeared, what they signed, and when, and Curtis's office kept one. If Curtis had stamped my name on March 9th, then either his journal carried a false entry waiting to be disproven, or it had nothing at all, a gap where a record should be. Set against the harder fact that I was documented 8,000 miles away, either answer was trouble for him. A notary who certifies that a person appeared before them, when that person was on another continent, has committed misconduct at best and helped a felony at worst. And here's what made my pulse steady instead of spike. I didn't have to break into anything to get that journal. Once this became a real criminal file, it could be subpoenaed, lawfully, through the front door. Marie added one more thing that turned the lock. Curtis had notarized other papers for Sabrina before. This wasn't a one-time favor. It was a pattern, a habit. A man who treated his seal like a rubber stamp for whoever paid. Patterns are easier to prove than single lies. I wrote his name in my log under Sabrina's and Ray's. 3 names now, 3 threads. And all 3 ran straight through a county courthouse I was going to walk into. In uniform, the second the Army let me fly. I made my decision at the start of week 8, and it was the opposite of what they expected. They expected a frantic mother flooding social media, calling everyone, falling apart in public where they could point and say, "See, unstable." Instead, through Hollis, I filed a formal SCRA stay request to freeze the placement proceedings and a forgery report with the county sheriff. I didn't post a word online. I didn't beg the relatives to take my side. I froze the clock and stacked the file. They picked a fight with a medic, and we don't panic. We triage. Stop the bleeding, protect the airway, document everything, and let the loud people exhaust themselves while you work. Before this story finishes, I want to give you the part that might matter for your own family. If you serve, or you love someone who does, write 2 things down. A family care plan, made before you leave, and the letters SCRA. Those 4 letters are the difference between losing your child to a forged page and getting her back. Share this with one military family tonight. It could be the page that saves them. The stay request went up the chain, and a few days later, word came back. The court would have to wait for me. Sabrina's push to make the placement permanent was paused, legally, until I could be heard. For the first time in 8 weeks, the clock stopped ticking against me. The silence on my phone wasn't loss anymore. It was the sound of their advantage draining away. They'd spent 2 months building a case on a single forged signature. Now they had to sit in that house and wonder what a deployed medic does with 8 weeks and a paper trail. They were about to find out. The stay landed like a hand on a slammed door. Sabrina's lawyer had been moving to make the placement permanent, fast, while I was conveniently unreachable. The SCRA stay stopped that cold. The court accepted that a deployed service member could not be railroaded in her absence, and the proceeding froze where it stood. Sabrina found out the way bullies always find out that the rules apply to them too, secondhand and furious. She texted me that night, and the calm was gone from her voice. "You can't hide behind the army forever," she wrote. I read it twice and put the phone face down. I didn't answer. That was the whole strategy now, and it was the hardest discipline I've ever practiced. She wanted a fight in the mud, where forged papers and screaming matches blur together and the truth gets dirty for everyone. I wasn't going to give her one. My weapon wasn't my voice. It was the stack of documents getting taller every day in Denise's file, and the silence I kept while it grew. Let her send the angry texts. Every one of them, screenshotted and dated, went into my log, where they made her look exactly like what she was, a person losing control of a lie. The stay did one more thing, the thing that mattered most. It guaranteed there would be a hearing. A real one, with a judge, where I would finally stand in the same room as the people who stole my name. They'd had 2 months of talking to a voice on a phone they could ignore. Now a date was being set where they'd have to face the woman the voice belonged to. And I intended to bring receipts for every word. The notary thread snapped first, and it snapped loud. With a criminal forgery file now open, the sheriff's investigator did the simple, lawful thing. He asked Curtis Vance for his notary journal. I imagine the color leaving Curtis's face when that request arrived, because here's what they found. For March 9th, the day my name was supposedly signed and sealed in his presence, his journal had no entry at all. Nothing. A blank line where his own record should have been. Think about what that means. He'd certified on an official county document that Torrey R. Myers appeared before him and signed. But his own logbook had never heard of me on that day. The stamp said one thing. The journal said the opposite by saying nothing. An empty line in a notary book is a very loud thing. It doesn't just fail to help him. It proves he stamped a signing that never happened in front of him. Hollis told me investigators take that seriously, because a notary's seal is supposed to be the thing you can trust when everything else is in doubt. When the seal lies, the whole chain it certified collapses. Curtis started talking to his own lawyer that week, and people who lawyer up over a $40 favor have usually realized the favor was a felony. One thread of their scheme was already fraying in his hands. I sat at my laptop half a world away and felt something I hadn't felt since Marie's voice broke. Not relief, not yet. Momentum. The first stone they'd built their case on had just turned out to be hollow, and once one is hollow, you start to wonder about all of them. While the notary thread frayed, I stacked the rest. Through Hollis and my unit, I pulled the hard records that put me on the other side of the planet on March 9th. The duty roster with my name and shift. The base access logs showing my badge swipes that day. And the deployment orders themselves. The official document, stamped at the highest level, ordering me overseas for the exact window that covered every date on their forged page. My civilian family law attorney, hired with help from JAG's referral, brought in a forensic document examiner to look at the signature. The examiner compared the forgery against a stack of my real signatures, years of them, and came back with a preliminary finding I already knew in my bones. The questioned signature did not match my genuine hand, and notably lacked the middle initial present in every authentic sample. I didn't need to raise my voice. I needed 3 dates to agree with each other. And they did. The roster, the access logs, the orders, all of them pointed at the same impossible truth. On the day I supposedly stood in a North Carolina office signing my daughter away, I was 8,000 miles from that office, badged onto a base, on a shift, under orders signed by people far above Sabrina's reach. You cannot argue with a timestamp. You can only hope nobody checks it. Somebody was checking it now, line by line, and every line held. My attorney called it the strongest documentary defense she'd seen in a custody fraud case. I called it Tuesday. This is what medics do. We don't win arguments. We assemble a chart so complete that the truth becomes the only diagnosis left standing. Their forged page was about to meet the entire record of my service, and the record does not blink. Sabrina, feeling the ground shift, did what cornered people do. She got louder in public to drown out the quiet she couldn't control. Marie was at a family dinner at Ray's house that week, and she called me after with the whole scene. In front of a table of relatives, Sabrina had stood up and announced it like a queen defending a crown. "I'm her guardian now," she said, "and no piece of paper from overseas changes that." Then she said the old line again, the one she'd carried in her pocket for years, the one she truly believed. "Soldiers don't get to be moms." She said it to a room of people who'd known me since I was a girl, daring any of them to disagree. According to Marie, nobody clapped. A cousin set down her fork. An aunt looked at her plate. The line that once hung in the air at a cookout now sounded different in that dining room, smaller, meaner, like a person trying to convince herself more than anyone else. Marie didn't argue with her. Marie just remembered every word and told me, because a witness who hears a thing with her own ears is worth more than any recording. I added the date and the quote to my log. Sabrina thought she was rallying the family. What she was actually doing was building my case for me, one public declaration at a time, in front of people who could be asked, under oath, what she said and how she said it. The louder she got, the clearer her motive became. She wasn't protecting a child. She was claiming one. And somewhere in that crowded dining room, my daughter could hear her aunt say her mother didn't count. Denise arranged a supervised video call between me and Lily, and it nearly broke the discipline I'd held for 2 months. The ringtone chimed, that good sound, and there was my daughter's face, filling the screen, too close, the way she always sat. But she wasn't all grin this time. She was quieter, careful, like the adults around her had taught her to be. "Did you get my drawing of you in your green clothes?" she asked first, because that mattered to her more than anything. I told her it was taped right above my pillow, that I looked at it every night, that the green was exactly right. She smiled at that, just for a second. Then she asked the question that someone had planted in her. "Aunt Sabrina says you're not coming back. Is that real?" I have built a career on keeping my voice level when everything in me wants to shake. I needed all of it now. "I have orders, baby," I said. "And orders mean I come home. That's a promise with a stamp on it." I told her that a stamp is the most serious kind of promise a soldier can make, because the whole army has to keep it. She thought about that, my serious girl, and decided to believe me, because I'd never once lied to her, and she knew it. We talked about frogs until the supervisor said time. After the screen went dark, I sat there with my dog tags pressed in my fist and let myself feel exactly 1 minute of everything I'd been holding back. Then I wiped my face, opened my log, and got back to work. Sabrina had told my daughter I wasn't coming home. I was going to make a liar of her with a stamp. Denise finished her review the week the orders cleared, and her call changed everything. She'd laid my evidence against their page side by side, the signature missing the initial that appeared in every genuine sample, the notary date that matched a day I was documented overseas, the journal with its damning blank line. She told me, in that careful, steady voice, that she was writing a recommendation. The placement, she said, appeared to have been obtained through fraudulent information, and that meant it had to go in front of the court to be set aside, not quietly amended. But the thing I remember most is the moment the orders themselves landed in her inbox. I'd sent her the stamped deployment orders that afternoon, the official document with the seal that proved where I was and on whose authority. 1 hour later, Denise called me back, and her voice was different now. "Sergeant Myers," she said, "I'm looking at your orders. The dates don't lie. We're going to court." 4 hours. That first day, from the request to her first call. 1 hour. This day, from the orders to the words I'd been fighting 2 months to hear. "We're going to court." I sat with the phone against my ear and let it settle into the hollow place that fear had carved out. Not "we'll see." Not "maybe." We're going to court, where a judge would look at the same stamp Sabrina had bet I couldn't use, and decide whose paper told the truth. The caseworker the family had counted on to rubber stamp their lie had become the professional who refused to. That's the thing about people who care whether the paper is true. You can't recruit them to a forgery. You can only lose to them. The emergency leave came through in the last week of the freeze, and it came the slow, honest way, not the way movies promise. My commander signed it. The chain moved it. It took days, not hours, because that's how real things move, and I'd made my peace with that long ago. A Red Cross message had backed it, the hearing date justified it, and finally I had a seat on a plane home. I packed light. The only thing I made sure of was the file, printed and tabbed, thick as a field manual. Every document in order. Roster, access logs, orders, the examiner's report, Denise's recommendation. 2 months of a log written in a medic's plain hand. I flew home in uniform because I wanted the room to see exactly who they'd called unfit. The flight was long, and somewhere over the ocean I let myself imagine Lily's face when this was over, and then I put the image away. Because hope is a stimulant, and I needed a steady pulse. When the wheels touched down on North Carolina ground, I felt the time zones collapse. 9 weeks of fighting a voice on a phone finally ending. For 2 months they'd fought someone they could mute with a bad signal. Tomorrow they'd face the woman whose name they'd stolen, standing up, in the same room, with the whole record of her service in her hands. I checked into a hotel near the courthouse, laid the file on the desk, and set my dog tags beside it. Tomorrow I would walk into that hearing as calm as I knew how to be. Let them be the ones to lose control. I'd already done my screaming, 2 months ago, alone in a bunk. I was done screaming. I'd come to read. The hearing was in a family court in our county, a plain room with bad lighting and good acoustics. I got there early, because early is a habit you don't lose. They filed in after. Sabrina came first, dressed like she was attending church, chin up, certain. Ray followed, rigid as a fence post, not meeting my eyes. And behind them, pale and sweating in a suit a size too tight, came Curtis Vance, the notary, here because a subpoena had made his attendance not optional. On my side sat my family law attorney, Captain Hollis on a video link from overseas, and Denise Wallace with her file. Lily's guardian ad litem, the advocate the court appoints to speak for the child, sat near the front, neutral, watching everyone. Lily herself waited in a room down the hall with Marie, close enough that the thought of her steadied me. I took my seat, set my file square on the table, and laid my dog tags beside it where I could touch them. It's a small ritual. 2 pieces of stamped metal that remind me who I am when a room tries to tell me otherwise. Sabrina caught the gesture and almost smiled, like she thought the tags were theater. She didn't understand yet that everything I'd built was stamped, just like those tags, and that stamps were exactly what this day would turn on. The judge came in. We all stood, and the quietest fight of my life finally got loud enough for a court to hear. Sabrina's side went first, and they led with the page. Her attorney presented the voluntary placement agreement as the cornerstone, a mother's documented consent, signed and notarized, regular on its face. Sabrina sat straighter as he said my name, as if the forged signature were a medal she'd earned. Ray nodded along, a man certain the paperwork would hold because paperwork had always held for men like him. The attorney argued that the placement was lawful, stable, in the child's best interest, and that a deployed parent's sudden objection shouldn't unsettle a child who was finally settled. It was a clean argument, if you didn't look at the page too closely. My attorney rose when it was our turn, and she did not raise her voice. "Your Honor," she said, We'd ask the court to look closely at two things on this agreement: the signature and the date. That was all. No theatrics, no accusations yet, just an invitation to read. I sat with my hands folded over my file and said nothing, because this was the part Hollis had drilled into me. Let the documents speak. The loudest person in a courtroom is usually the one with the weakest paper. I had the strongest paper of my life sitting under my hands, and I'd waited 2 months and crossed an ocean to let it talk. The judge put on her glasses and pulled the agreement toward her. Across the room, Sabrina's certainty held. Not for much longer. Then we laid out the record, one stamped truth at a time, and the room changed temperature as we went. My attorney started with the orders. She entered my deployment orders into evidence, the official document with its seal, and read the dates aloud, the window that put me overseas across every date on their page. She entered the duty roster for March 9th, my name on a dawn shift. She entered the base access logs, my badge swipes, 8,000 miles from that notary's office. Then she turned to the signature and called the forensic examiner's report, which found that the questioned signature did not match my genuine hand and lacked the middle initial present in every authentic sample. I have signed my name with that initial for 12 years, she said. The person who forged it never knew that. And then the blade. She entered the notary's own journal, subpoenaed, and pointed to the line for March 9th. A blank line, Your Honor, on the very day Mr. Vance certified that my client appeared before him. I sat perfectly still through all of it and let the documents do what documents do. When my attorney finished, she said the sentence I'd been carrying since week 6, and she let me say a version of it myself when the judge asked if I had anything to add. I signed nothing, I said, my voice level. The notary's book agrees. The duty roster agrees. The access logs agree. And the orders, stamped by an authority none of them could touch, agree. The only thing in this room that says I signed that page is the page itself, and the page is a lie. The room was very quiet, and that's when Sabrina stood up. Sabrina lost it the way I'd hoped she would, in front of the only audience that mattered. She came up out of her chair before her attorney could stop her, and the church calm she'd worn all morning cracked down the middle. She didn't have a uniform, she said, her voice climbing. She wasn't here. I was the one raising that little girl while she played soldier overseas. Her finger jabbed the air toward me. And then, because it was the truest thing in her and she couldn't hold it anymore, she shouted the line she'd carried for years, the line she'd said at a cookout and a dinner table, and now, finally, in a court of law, where it would live in the record forever. Soldiers don't get to be moms. The room went silent after it. Even the air seemed to flinch. The judge let the silence sit, the way you let a confession breathe. I didn't shout back. I'd learned a long time ago that you never interrupt an opponent who is busy proving your case. I just looked at her, steady, and said the only thing the moment needed. I'm a soldier, I said, and I'm her mom. Those aren't opposites. You just needed them to be. Sabrina's attorney got her back into her chair, but it didn't matter. She'd said it. The motive she'd hidden behind a forged page had just walked into the open on its own 2 feet, in her own raised voice, and everyone in that room had heard it. After Sabrina, the rest folded fast. The judge turned to Curtis Vance and asked him, plainly, to explain the blank line in his own journal for March 9th. Curtis looked at his lawyer, and his lawyer looked at the floor, and then Curtis gave the only answer the record allowed. He admitted he had not actually watched me sign, that the document had been brought to him already signed, that he'd stamped it as a favor and dated it the way he was asked. A notary admitting he certified a signing he never witnessed is a man ending his own career in real time, and he knew it. Then the judge looked at Ray, and Ray, who had never once bent in all the years I'd known him, finally did. His voice came out cracked and old. I thought I was protecting her, he said. I thought a child needed a home that stayed put. He believed it, even then. That was the saddest part of the whole day, watching a man discover that the rules he'd bent had bent him into something that hurt a child. The judge didn't comfort him. She wrote something down. Then she said the words that turned Ray's own sentence inside out. "The best interest of a child," she said, "is not served by fraud." We did what was best for that child, Ray had told me on the phone 2 months ago. The court had just defined best for him, and it did not include a forged page or a stolen name. The judge ruled with the calm I'd been practicing for 2 months, and her calm undid theirs completely. She found that the placement had been obtained through fraudulent information, a forged signature certified by a notary who had not witnessed it, presented to the court as my consent when no such consent existed. On that basis, she set the placement aside and returned my daughter to me, her mother, recognizing Marie as the designated caregiver I had named in the family care plan I filed before I deployed. She referred the forgery and the notary's conduct to the district attorney for review, noting that those were matters for a different kind of courtroom. She made no absolute speeches and used no absolute words. She didn't have to. She simply said that under North Carolina law, an order obtained by fraud cannot be allowed to stand, and that the record before her left no honest doubt about what had happened. Sabrina sat frozen. Ray stared at his hands. Curtis was already gone in spirit, picturing the hearing that would take his seal. And then the judge said the only words I'd crossed an ocean to hear. "The court directs that the child be returned to her mother." A door opened at the back of the room. I stood up, because a soldier stands, and because a mother could not have stayed in that chair if you'd bolted her to it. I'd come into that room with a file. I was leaving it with my daughter. Lily came through that door at a dead run. Marie must have told her it was time, because she didn't hesitate. She just found me with her eyes and crossed the room like the floor was on fire. I dropped to one knee, down to her height, the way you go to a patient instead of making them come to you, and she hit me so hard I rocked back on my heel. Her arms went around my neck, and my dog tags pressed between us, cold metal warming fast against her cheek, and for the first time in 9 weeks I let go of the steadiness I'd held like a tourniquet. "You came back," she said into my collar. "You have orders," she said, "and orders mean you come home." She'd believed me. Through all of it, she'd held the one promise I gave her, the one with a stamp on it. I pulled back just enough to look at her, this gap-toothed girl who loved frogs and the color green, and I told her the truest thing I knew. "I will always come home to you. Always." Over her shoulder, I saw Sabrina being walked out one way and Ray another, and I felt nothing about them at all. My whole record, every stamped page of it, had only ever been for this. For one run across a courtroom. For my daughter's arms. The aftermath was measured, the way real consequences are. The sheriff's file went to the district attorney for a criminal investigation, and in the months that followed, Sabrina was charged under North Carolina law, the kind of charge that follows a person and costs them more than the subsidy she'd chased, which the state moved to recover from her. Curtis Vance lost his notary commission and, in time, faced charges of his own for certifying a signing he never witnessed. His rubber stamp had finally stamped him. Ray was charged with nothing provable. But he lost the only things he'd ever actually had, my trust and any place in Lily's life, and he packed that loss home to a quiet house and an empty chair where a granddaughter used to sit. We didn't speak again. I updated my family care plan that month, tighter than before. Every contingency named, every door locked twice, with Marie still standing as Lily's person if the worst ever came. I finished my deployment with my daughter safe and my custody secure, and I served the rest of those orders knowing exactly what I was protecting. The family that called a soldier unfit learned what a soldier does with 2 months and a paper trail. They went looking for a woman they could erase with a forged signature. They found a medic who'd spent her whole life refusing to let people bleed out, including herself. If there's one thing I want you to carry out of this, it's this. Service isn't the opposite of motherhood, and a forged page only holds until someone with the truth, and the patience to file it, finally walks into the room. That's my story. A stolen signature, an empty notary line, and orders that told the truth when my own family wouldn't. If you serve, or you love someone who does, Set up a family care plan and learn what the SCRA protects before you ever need it. Do it this week, and send this to one military family who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.